My guest today is David Hirsch. Dave is a businessman, fatherhood activist, philanthropist, endurance cyclist. We might talk about that, and author. He's the founder of 21st Century Dads and the host of the Dad to Dad podcast. He's the author of 21st Century Dads, A Father's Journey to Break the Cycle of Father Absence. He's also the father of five. He resides in Chicago, Illinois area with his wife, Peggy. Welcome to the show, David.
Jeff, thanks for having me. I'm inspired by the work that you're doing.
Thank you very much. You have quite a list of accomplishments there.
Yeah, well, that was very flattering of you to make that elongated introduction, but I can assure you that I'm not the one that wears the pants in my family.
Well, you did tell me something earlier that I got the impression that your wife is actually smarter than you too.
100% for sure. We can document that. She was the valedictorian of our high school class, straight A's at Notre Dame accounting, went to work in Big 8 public accounting, went to the University of Chicago Business School, did very well in finance, worked in a family office. And then when we had our second child, she decided I'd rather be a full-time mom. And fortunately, my career had started to take off by then. So it was a little bit of an adjustment going back. I guess that would have been 32 years ago, but we were able to do that. So she plugged out for 20 years and then she got back in the workforce shortly after our baby went off to college.
That's similar to our story, my
Mhm.
wife and I's. She wasn't an accountant, but she's in the medical field.
Okay. She's not a slacker either.
No, not at all. And she's smarter than I am too.
Oh, well, I'm sure we have a lot more in common than we know. And that's one of those things that maybe we both married up.
I definitely did. So let's talk a little bit about your story. So did you grow up in the Chicago area?
Yep. Born and raised. I jokingly say that other than some vacation and some business travel, I barely left the state of Illinois. I went to University of Illinois undergrad accounting, and I went to Northwestern University for business school as well.
And I know that you weren't originally Catholic.
I was not. No. In fact, all my relatives are Jewish. And my parents divorced. My mom raised me and my younger brother from my age 6. And she was a Chicago public school teacher. And I share that, not for sympathy or pity, but that was just our situation. And thank God for my maternal grandfather, Sam Solomon, who stepped into those shoes that my dad had sort of vacated and became my father figure. I didn't feel like I was lacking, right, for a father figure when I was a young guy. And he was the torchbearer of our Jewish heritage. So I know that when we got married, I had to go through pre-Cana and agree that if we had any children, that we'd raise them as Catholics. And because I didn't grow up in a religious household, that didn't seem like a huge commitment. We'll cross that bridge when we get there mentality. And we had 5 kids in about 7 years from 89 to 96. And we baptized them. They all went through K through 8 Catholic school. They led a very well-recognized Catholic upbringing. We went to church. The 7 of us would go to church pretty much every Sunday. What a great Catholic family. But if people paid close attention, I didn't go up to get communion, right?
Mhm.
So my grandfather passed away. My grandfather, Sam Solomon, passed away. I guess it was 2001. And I wasn't motivated, right, to make a change. Peggy never pushed me to convert to Catholicism. And it wasn't until 2010 I went to a funeral of a close friend who very sadly passed away at age 57, a father of 6, president of the National Center for Fathering. His name was Peter Spokes. And I was so moved. I mean, like in a way that I've never been moved before about how balanced his kids were with the fact that he had passed away. And they weren't bumbling, couldn't get through their eulogies for their dad type of situation. And there was this serenity or this peace. And they talked about the faith that he had passed down to them and how involved and present he was in their lives. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. I remember talking to people there at the funeral, thinking about it on the flight back from Kansas City to Chicago, mentioning it to my wife. And she said, well, maybe you should talk to somebody. So I reached out to a Catholic priest friend, a family friend of ours, Father Berto Birchmans is his name, and met with him. And he said, well, maybe you should evaluate converting. And he said, and this is not paraphrasing, this is exactly what he said, Jeff. He said, let's not be too hasty here. It's taking you the first 49 years of your life to get to this point. here's some things that you should read. I'll suggest a couple other books that you could check out from the library type of thing. Why don't we get together in 3 months? That 3 months went by just like that. And I said, I feel just as strongly now as I did then. And I signed up for the RCIA program, went through 9 months of that with 11 other individuals, one other catechumen, and 10 candidates. And we just celebrated our 13th, the 12 of us just celebrated our 13th anniversary, right? Being full-fledged Christians. And it was a very meaningful experience. And what motivated me was that I wanted what Peter Spokes had, was to have that type of relationship with his kids and his wife for that matter.
So what did your kids think when you converted?
For some reason, they thought it was really courageous of me. And I'm like, really? Courageous? I wouldn't think of that. But I can tell you that my reluctance to go through the program was that I didn't want to be one of those people who stood up in front of the congregation and then was shuttled out during the service, right, to go reflect on whatever they were reflecting on. And I'm fairly confident my wife was just as shocked that I decided to do this as anybody. Like I said, she never put any pressure on me to convert.
Mm.
And but it was the Holy Spirit talking to me, right? And it was pretty obvious. It wasn't like a hasty decision. And I really appreciate Father Brito's advice. In fact, he married our older two kids subsequently. And I'm hoping, God willing, that if our other three get married and he's still alive, he's in his 70s now, that he'll marry them as well.
So did this change and have any impact on your marriage with Peggy?
Mm, Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think it was a material impact.
Mhm.
Um, we've always been pretty active, not only at the church, but in the community. So it's not like he did a 180, right? That I was this
Right.
heathen, this person that was laying on the couch watching sports and not involved and was really focused on my situation or myself. So I'd say on the margin, it's probably brought us closer together, but not in a dramatic way.
Now I would say it's more courageous of you to actually go to mass every week, even when you're not Catholic with your family.
Yeah, well, we did make an agreement to raise our kids as Catholics, and it was pretty obvious to me early on that I never wanted one of our kids or all five of them to say, how come we have to go and dad doesn't have to go?
Right.
Right. So it was just commitment. Maybe it didn't mean as much to me, right? The liturgy or what was being read or said. But I thought it was important from being a good role model. And there's 168 hours in a week. It's 1 hour a week, right? That's not the definition of being religious or being spiritual, right? Going to do mass once a week. What really counts is the other 167 hours. What are you doing? How are you communicating with people? How are you showing up for people?
Absolutely. So just a deeper question for you. Did you find that peace that you saw in that funeral in Kansas City?
It's a really good question. I don't know that I can say that I found it as if it's a thing, but I have made it a practice to be more intentional about my spirituality. One of the habits that I developed as a result of the RCIA program was journaling every evening, typically before I go to bed. And it's really just to acknowledge the 3, 5, 10 things that I'm grateful for that have happened during the day. And I think it puts me in the right frame of mind before I go to sleep, right? That I'm
Mhm.
thinking positive things. What am I grateful for? And some days we don't have that much to be grateful for. A really hard day, whether it's work related, health related, family related, or all of the above. But I think it is important to discipline ourselves to put ourselves in a grateful state of mind. And I've also joined two Bible studies, one on Wednesday morning, one on Friday mornings. Totally different. One is more of a typical or traditional Bible study. The other is like mostly businessmen in the Chicago area. They call it Chicago Fellowship. I've been involved with both for about a decade now. So I think that I've developed relationships with like-minded men
Mhm.
who want to be more intentional about their spirituality. And they're not all Christians. They come from all different religions. And I think that's been a very positive aspect of it as well.
That's a really important point there is that men need men.
Mm,
We need to be around other men to sharpen ourselves.
Yeah, there's a phrase, scripture, that iron sharpens iron.
Absolutely.
And there's no question about that. Maybe we'll get to that when we talk about the Special Fathers Network and the mastermind group situation as well.
Yeah, we can jump into that right now. At what point and what caused you to start both of these foundations?
Mm. Well, that's a really good question. So, beginning of my, if I can call it advocacy for fatherhood, started shortly after I became a father for the fifth time. So, our youngest daughter, Adeline, was born in October of 1996. And I was just finishing up a fellowship with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, which required 3 months a year for 3 years or 9 months in total. So I'm working full time. Our family is growing by leaps and bounds. And it was somewhat stressful, not just for me, but for my wife, right? Because I'm going for a couple days here, a week here, a couple weeks there on occasion. And she's holding down the fort with all 5 kids. So I made a very sincere commitment that once the fellowship was over, coincidentally at the same time that our youngest was born, that I was going to seek how to be a better father. So I was doing whatever anybody could to educate myself and find the resources. And I stumbled across some statistics that I just couldn't wrap my head around. And remember, this is circa 1996, early 1997. And the estimate then, and it's not too different today, unfortunately, is there's some 24 million kids growing up in father-absent homes across America. And if you do the math, that's about 4 out of every 10. And there's this misperception that it's those poor inner city Black kids. And by the way, I'm totally transparent about terminology and talking to mixed ethnic audiences, that what's the sad reality is that 7 or 8 out of 10 Black kids in America are growing up without their dads. But in absolute numbers, there are 2 times the number of white versus Black kids growing up in father absent homes. It just has to do with the demographics. And I thought, well, geez, am I the last person to learn about this? And as I reflected on that and talked with friends and others, nobody seemed to like be aware of that. And we talk about it. It's pretty common knowledge, but we don't call it father absence. We call it the breakdown of the family. And I thought it was important to draw attention to this, be a little bit more specific about it. So I helped create the Illinois Fatherhood Initiative. It's one of the country's first statewide not-for-profit fatherhood organizations. And the signature program of that organization is known as the Father of the Year Essay Contest. So it's a partnership with the Chicago Public Schools, the State Board of Education, the Office of Catholic Education. And each of the superintendents got behind us in 1997 when we first launched it. And the mission of the Illinois Fatherhood Initiative is to actively engage fathers in the education of children. So if you forget everything we talked about, the most important thing that a father, particularly a young father, can do for his children, in addition to respecting and showing love to the mother of his child, if not his wife, is to be actively engaged in the education of his children. And to draw attention to that, we decided to copy an essay contest that was taking place in Kansas City and Minneapolis with the Royals and the Twins, respectively. And we thought, like snooty Chicagoans, remember, this is a statewide initiative. That's why I say snooty Chicagoans. We've got 2 baseball teams, the Cubs and the White Sox.
Right.
And somebody's always going to be home on Father's Day. And so that very first year, we reached out to the Tribune, who used to own the White Sox, or excuse me, used to own the Cubs, and they were on board. They wanted to help us promote this essay contest. Well, those essay contests in Kansas City and in Minneapolis got like a couple hundred essays each year. So our goal was just to do better than that. And we got 30,000 essays the very first year.
30,000?
30,000. We're like, oh my God, like we have those boxes. I mean, literally just like dozens, maybe hundreds of boxes, like from the post office, were had to be stored in my office at work, right? Just a few blocks away from the downtown post office. And we were in a little bit of a pickle, right? How are we going to get through all 30,000 of these essays in a relatively short period of time? Because we had made a commitment that we were going to evaluate all the essays. So I recruited about 400 volunteers that first year. And it was such a profound experience for our volunteers, men and women, young and old, people of means like you and I, Jeff, in some cases, literally sitting elbow to elbow with incarcerated dads, helping evaluate what the children of Illinois had to say about their dads, stepdads, granddads, and father figures. We thought it would be too bad if only those 400 individuals had a chance to read those essays and see what the kids of Illinois had to say. So I don't know where the idea came from, but I got a small, like $5,000 grant from a local organization, and they gave us the money to print 5,000 essay booklets. We took a couple dozen of the essays, first through 12th grade that first year, and reprinted them in the children's own handwritten or typed written words. This wasn't like a marketing department trying to put us things, just very authentic, very transparent. And our idea, this was my idea, was to be a social entrepreneur. And by my definition, that's taking for-profit ideas and bringing them to bear for the benefit of the community or for a not-for-profit. And the simple idea, Jeff, was to take that $5,000, print those 5,000 essay booklets. So that's $1 each. If listeners are following the math, we're going to sell them for $10 each. We're going to turn that $5,000 into $50,000 in just a couple months. And we got the local food store, Jewel, to give us end caps, right, to promote this. Because remember, these aren't books. They don't have an ISBN number. They're not greeting cards. They don't fit in the slots with the greeting cards. And I don't think we even broke even, honestly. I don't even know that we sold 500 of those things, right, to break even. But one of those essay booklets found its way to Harpo Studios. I got a call from one of the producers at the Oprah Winfrey Show. They said, "We love what you're doing. We're doing a special pre-Father's Day special, the Friday before Father's Day. This is circa 1997. And we'd like these particular 7 of the 24 essayists to come in for a taping. And we'd like you, David Hirsch, to be on the Oprah Winfrey Show." I'm like, "Really?" So that was like a surreal experience, right? Being there on the Winfrey Show, sitting elbow to elbow with my then 89-year-old maternal grandfather, Sam Solomon. And that was the very beginning of the Illinois Fatherhood Initiative. I won't go into any more detail, but to say that that essay contest has been going on now for 27 years. We've collected well over 425,000 essays, and it's made a little bit of a dent. And I'm not just being humble. It's such a big problem. It's made a little bit of a dent in this issue of father absence in the state of Illinois. At least we've raised awareness and engaged hundreds of thousands of families, right, and their children, and hundreds of volunteers every year. So anyway, those were the seeds for my fatherhood advocacy.
Well, awareness is step one, right?
I think so.
So, how did 21st Century Dad start?
Oh, geez. The short story, I'll try to keep it short, was when our baby went off to college, I'm literally sitting at the kitchen counter one Saturday morning in February 2015, and I felt like God was talking to me. Not aloud like you and I are talking, but just I got this message. It was the weirdest thing. And the message was, "You should do a cross-country bicycle ride." I'm like, "You've got the wrong person," right? Because I'm not an endurance bike rider. I don't even own a bicycle that you could ride across the United States. And couldn't shake the idea, reached out to a friend like a week later who was a well-recognized endurance bike rider, ridden like 3 different rides, 12,000 miles in total. Solo rider, guy's in his 70s, and Bob Lee is his name. And he said, "That would be very ambitious to ride across the country, especially in like a month." And then we shortened it to 3 weeks, the 3 weeks leading up to Father's Day. So we sort of mapped out that maybe we could get from Santa Monica to Chicago, like the old Route 66. And I started talking about it, finally got around to like having the courage to tell my wife what I was thinking about. And this is what Peggy says. She said, "Well, if that's what you want to do with 3 weeks of your summer, that's on you. I'm not riding alongside, and I'm not going to be in some like SAG vehicle, like following you." And what I heard, Jeff, was she didn't say no, right?
That's right.
Right? So I'm like, "Okay." And I said, "Well, I'm not committed to doing this, right? I don't even own a bike. I've never done anything like this before." And I should mention I'm athletic, right? I like to run, I like to bike, I like to swim, but in moderation, right? Like shorter distance triathlons for the most part. And so I ended up buying a bike. I started training, put a crew together, a schedule together, and I took a big leap of faith, which was to fly out to LA and start pedaling back. And I remember the night before I left, my wife is concerned, right? Because this is 3 weeks. I'm going to be on the road. And it's like when you tell people that you're going to get a motorcycle, they always tell you the worst story that's ever happened to somebody that they know that had a motorcycle. Somebody got killed. Somebody is quadriplegic, paraplegic, or whatever their accident was. And so people were telling her about all these, individuals that they knew that were cross-country bicycle riders that got killed or got maimed as well. So she's concerned. And she said the night before I left, "How do you know you can do this?" Right? I know that you bought a bike and you've done like 8 century rides and you got this crew and blah, blah, blah. But, you're 54 years old, right? 100 plus miles a day for 21 days in a row. What are you thinking? And I said, well, I don't know that I can do this, but what I know for sure is that if I don't try, I'll never know, which is sort of like a mantra that I've lived my life by. And anyway, it was hard. I'm not going to say it was easy peasy. There were 2 times in those 21 days that I couldn't finish the mileage that we had designated for that day. The crew marked the spot on the road, got a ride in to where we were staying that night, got up a little bit earlier the next morning. They drove me back out to the same spot so that I can literally say that I rode all 2,325 miles from Santa Monica to Chicago, arriving on Father's Day at US Cellular Field to a crowd of about 40,000 at a Chicago White Sox Father's Day baseball game. And it was transformative, right? Personally transformative, physically transformative, spiritually transformative. And I felt like I found my voice. I had obviously been advocating for fatherhood involvement for lots of years, maybe 15 or 16 years up until that point, in the name of the Illinois Fatherhood Initiative. And that was the beginning of the 21st Century Dads Foundation. That was the seed capital that we raised, the initial awareness that we raised. And I would say that it gave me the confidence that I don't think I had prior to the ride to being more outspoken. I had done a lot of media from California to Chicago, print, radio, TV media, and people quizzed me, sort of like you're quizzing me here, about the experience. And I ended up giving a TEDx talk shortly thereafter in October of that year. And then in the spring of 2016, I wrote the book that you made reference to earlier, A Father's Journey to Break the Cycle of Father Absence. And I didn't know that those things would occur, but I felt more comfortable talking about this issue like I had been, and then opening up a little bit about my own personal story, right? Which I hadn't really talked about. Anybody close to me knew that I grew up without my biological father for the most part. I always would just sort of candy coat it over and say, when somebody asked me about my father or father figure, just always start talking like I did earlier about my maternal grandfather, Sam Sullivan, right? He was there every step of the way for me. It didn't hurt that I was the oldest of his 3 grandchildren. I was literally born on his birthday. So we always celebrated our birthdays together. But anyway, that was the beginning of the 21st Century Dads Foundation. We went on to do 4 Dads Honor Rides, Boston to Chicago, around Lake Michigan. And then this past summer, June of 2023, we participated, a small group of us participated in something called Race Across America. And 4 of us rode from Oceanside, California to Annapolis, Maryland, 3,000 miles in 7 days, 19 hours and 10 minutes to be exact. And by the way, we were one of the slowest 4-person teams to do it that year.
So you've truly become an endurance cyclist through this.
I still don't think of myself as an endurance cyclist, but a friend said, and with all due respect, he said, with all the cycling you've done, you just have to own that. I've just done it really to stay healthy and try to stay injury free. Overall, this time I'm 63 now. I'm a little bit in denial about my age, Jeff. Tried to do an ultra marathon a couple summers ago. Didn't go very well. I only made it 85 of the 100 miles. I've done a couple
Only
Ironman.
85.
Yeah. Well, it's humbling. I'm telling you, if you train for 6 months,
Yeah.
you've got what it takes. And then you realize that you don't have what it takes. There's a lesson there too, right? And 2 of my kids, the younger 2, were crewing for me. This is the Keys 100 from Key Largo, mile marker 100 down to Key West, mile marker 0, 40 something bridges. That's the elevation, by the way. Going up and down the bridges is the elevation since Florida's pretty flat. And
Close to sea level too.
oh yeah, yeah. And exactly where you are, mile by mile, because you can count off the mileposts. You don't even need to know. You don't even have to have like a watch or anything. But that's the only time I've ever participated in an organized event, running event or triathlon type event where I didn't finish. I'm not a competitive person. I've always finished in the lower half of my age group. in almost everything I've ever done. It's not about the time. It's just about setting a goal, working toward that goal, and then accomplishing the goal. Again, not in a competitive way, but just from a personal standpoint. And that's why I said it was very humbling to work diligently for 6 months and to come up 15 miles short. But I think when you test yourself, when we all test ourselves, right, you want to know what you're capable of. And at least that day, I didn't have what it took. But I don't have this, oh, I have to go back at it again. I'm going to prove that I can do it. I wanted to do an ultra marathon. By definition, that's anything more than 26.2 miles. Mission accomplished.
Absolutely. I think 85, there's two ways to look at it. One, I didn't get 100, or two, I got 85.
Yeah. Well, for the most part, I still think of it as like a B, like 85%. It was like a B day, not an A day, right? A little bit better than average, but it didn't have that sense of fulfillment that I was hoping for.
So what's the focus of 21st Century Dads?
It's a good question. The original mission of the 21st Century Dads Foundation was to raise awareness and resources for fatherhood organizations. During my advocacy, the first 15 or so years, I'd gotten to know a lot of people who were also fatherhood advocates in schools and hospitals, in the workplace, or community for that matter. And the goal of the 21st Century Dads initially was to get those organizations working together to raise awareness and more resources. And we split the resources with the other organizations the first few years, but they never engaged. They couldn't, they didn't put one guy on a bike for at least a day, each of those first 21-day rides. And that it dawned on us that we weren't accomplishing what we had set out to do. We raised some awareness and some money, mission accomplished, but it really wasn't getting the organizations to work together, build a big tent, right, and get everybody to play nice in the sandbox, if you will. So I learned a thing or two about not-for-profit management. And if I'm objective, maybe I'm just not the right leader, right, to get the organizations to work together. So we evaluated closing the not-for-profit down, or maybe just narrowing our focus. And we narrowed it down to four what we thought were rather challenging areas for dads. One is working with high poverty dads, like inner city dads, like on the south side of Chicago or in any urban area. The second is working with incarcerated dads, which I've done some of. Men have been removed not only from their family, but society at large. And let's just say that most of them exercise some bad judgment, maybe not once or twice, but consistently bad judgment. They're not bad people. The third area was working with young dads, teen fathers, men who become fathers inadvertently in most cases, age typically 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. And then the fourth category is working with dads raising kiddos with special needs. So we decided to focus on the latter two categories, teen fathers and dads raising kids with special needs. Came to realize very quickly there's very little infrastructure around teen parenting. There are some programs for teen moms, but very little for teen fathers. And there seems to be a fair amount of infrastructure in the world of special needs. Special Olympics being one of the most well-recognized state-by-state organizations here in the US, internationally for that matter, and organizations locally like Gigi's Playhouse. And we were warmly embraced by those two organizations when we announced that we were trying to do something with dads raising kids with special needs. So the simple concept was to recruit a large number of dads, seasoned dads who have 10 or more years of experience raising a child with special needs, and match them, mentor them to younger dads or dads with younger children who have a similar or identical special need. And in a perfect world, it would be same gender of the child, same special need, same socioeconomic group, same family structure, married, not married, one child versus multiple children, same ethnic group, same religious belief. And in a perfect world, they would all each be in the same geographic area. So that's not just a virtual relationship, but they can get together face to face for a soda or a cup of coffee. And early on, like we had used storytelling with the essays, with the All My Father initiative, somebody had approached me and they said, well, what do you think about podcasting? I said, I like podcasts. I like to listen to podcasts. Some of them are entertaining, some of them are enlightening, some of them are inspiring, some of them are all the above. And they said, "No, not what do you think about listening to podcasts? What do you think about being a podcast host?" I'm like, that's pretty comical, right? That I'm a numbers person. I manage investments. That's what I do for a living, right? Fortunately, I have a skill, like it's a number sticky brain skill. And I said, I have no experience doing interviews, no editing or production experience. I mean, there's not a chance. I said, well, you're very sincere about your advocacy for fathers. I think you'd be good at it. So those were the seeds that had rather quickly. Maybe you can reflect on your own start, Jeff. Why did you start the podcast? What experience did you have that qualified you to be a podcast host? Right. Or members of the not so much club. Anyway, I thought about it and I thought, well, I'm just going to ask like a handful of guys that I've known for a decade or decades who have children with special needs if they would be willing to allow me to interview them. And if they said yes, maybe I would follow through and just see where it goes. So the first 5 or 6 guys all said yes. And I'm like, okay, I guess I need to follow through with this. So that was circa the fall of 2017. The episode that's coming out currently is episode number 300, right? So they come out weekly on Fridays. They're known as the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. And that's been the primary way that we've gone about drawing attention to the work of the Special Fathers Network, is shining a bright light on the positive things that are going on in these families. And it's mostly dads, stepdads, granddads, and father figures that I've interviewed. But of the first 300 episodes, it's probably at least 24 women and many others who are not the biological father or directly related biologically, but they have something of importance to share about the important role that a father plays or about overcoming obstacles or disability. And it's just become part of, what I do on a ongoing basis. Fortunately, I was able to find somebody that could edit and produce the podcast. So I just bird dog the interviews, much maybe like you do, Jeff. And I turn the recordings over and then he's got a queue. I'm usually about 8 or 10 weeks ahead. And he says, here's the episode. Listen to it just for clarity. If there's any suggestions you want to make, let me know. And then we post them on Fridays.
Awesome. So I know that you've separated those now into different segments, the podcasts.
I think what you're referring to is the audiobooks.
Yes.
Yeah. When we got to about episode 100, people started saying it's increasingly difficult to find the episodes that they wanted. So if you have a child with autism or Down syndrome or cerebral palsy or rare disease, you can filter for that. But, if you're on a podcast app, it's really difficult to filter. You'd have to go to the 21stcenturydads.org website. So somebody said, what do you think about an audiobook? I'm like, well, sounds like a reasonable enough idea. Don't know much about how to create audiobooks. So we created a template. We used the first 12 episodes on autism as the first audiobook. Got one of the 12 dads, to do the foreword for the book, put a preface and an epilogue on the front and the back, and we posted it on Audible. And we were very fortunate that Joe Mantegna, the actor, originally from Chicago, but he's been out in LA for 30 years, who was episode number 5 of the podcast, agreed to do the forward. And his prominence or visibility, notoriety, however you want to refer to it, didn't hurt, right? The fact that he was involved with the first audiobook. We went on to create 4 more audiobooks. The second was on Down syndrome, and then on rare disease, and then on cerebral palsy. And then the most recent book that came out at the end of 2023, it's a little bit of a heavier topic, if I can call it that. Not that autism, Down syndrome, rare disease, and cerebral palsy aren't heavy enough, but it's on losing a child. I've done a couple dozen interviews where sadly the child or children have passed away. Remember, many of these kiddos are medically fragile, right? They're not expected to live the same length of life that a typical person would. And with some of the rare diseases, they're they're terminal situations, right? The estimated life expectancy might be 5 years or 8 years or 10 years or some abbreviated period of time. And while the subject matter was rather heavy, we thought it would be a service to make it as easy as possible for those that are seeking those particular interviews, as opposed to having to scroll through and try to find them. We're not making any money, I would be quick to say, on those audiobooks, but we're just trying to be intentional. In this case, repurposing the content from our podcasts in a format that might be more useful for constituents.
And where can people find those audiobooks?
Well, they're on Audible. The easiest thing to do if you wanted to find them would be to go to the 21stcenturydads.org website, right? They're on the homepage, as is the podcast, the SFN Dad to Dad podcast, and a lot of the other resources. We have a lot of partners and affiliates. There's probably well over 100 books. Not all of them are on special needs. Some of them are on leadership and the importance of family and marriage, for that matter. And we're just trying to be a go-to resource for families raising kids with special needs, and not just for the dads, but for the moms and the dads.
Pretty awesome. What else would you like to share with the regular Catholic guys out there, David?
Mm. Well, I'm not a cradle Catholic. My wife is quick to remind me. She thinks that people that come to their faith as adults are a little bit more intentional, don't just take things for granted. So I'm still climbing a steeper part of the learning curve as it relates to our Catholic faith. So I don't know that I'm the most qualified person to talk about that. But I think I'd shared with you earlier that I've tried to be more intentional about my spirituality as a result of going through the RCIA program that I talked about earlier. And a couple of the things that I've done and tried to be very consistent about, they'd suggested when I was going through the RCIA program to start journaling. And it's like a gratitude or a thankfulness journal. And I've done that now for 13 years. And I try to do that right before I go to bed to put myself in the right frame of mind and just reflect on, no matter how hard the day was, to reflect and write down 2, 3, 5, 10 things that I'm grateful for. And I joined a couple of Bible studies, one on Wednesday mornings with some guys that live out here in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, and developed some really meaningful relationships and friendships, for that matter. And there's a Friday morning group that calls itself Chicago Fellowship that's been going on for about 30 years, mostly business people, but it's expanded to a much wider range of individuals, a number of different religious backgrounds as well. And it's much more multi-ethnic than the first group that I was telling you about, which is more homogeneous. So I feel like I have been a little bit more intentional and have been able to develop relationships with others as a result. And there's a good friend, his name is Ibu Patel, and we've known each other for the better part of 15 years. He started something called the Interfaith Youth Corps, which is known as Interfaith America now. And it's about bringing people together from different faith beliefs, as well as atheists and agnostics. And I think it's really important that we develop the language to communicate and to build the bridges between the different religions. It seems like a lot of problems stem from differences, right? People are sort of becoming more polarized in society. And I'm not just talking about like politics polarization. There's plenty of that to go around, but there seems to be a certain level of religious polarization as well. So I think anything that we can each do to meet people, interact with people from different faith beliefs than our own, and acknowledge that not everybody has a faith, right? Belief. Could be either atheist or agnostic for that matter. And we should have a mutual respect, right? We're all humans, right? We are all made in the image of God. And who are we to judge other people, right? So when you catch yourself, you know, maybe thinking that somebody is not the same as or might be less than, you need to catch yourself and say, hey, who am I to judge what somebody's doing or where they're coming from? It takes a lot of discipline, mental discipline, right? To listen to some things that you know are just totally contrary to your own beliefs. But I think if we can identify what we have in common as opposed to what the differences are and build on that, we'll be in a better place.
Thank you, David. And thank you for being on the show. It was great to have you.
Yeah, well, Jeff, I really admire the work you're doing. I've listened to a number of your podcasts, and I hope that I'll be able to continue to listen and that God will continue to bless the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. God bless.
And to you, thanks.